Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Ethics Class number 6, Monday, March 30th, 2020. Today, the topic is punishment. First of all, as you see in the notes, recall the 5 definitions of a law: an ordinance of reason for the common good promulgated by the one who has care of the community. Just something to keep in mind as we go through the different considerations with regard to punishment. Punishment basically has 3 functions as we're studying it. And you'll see those under B: to reestablish justice, to correct the offender, and to do others from committing the same offense. Take a simple example with children. Say 3 children playing in a room: Lauren, Katie, and Alex. Mom's in the other room, or Dad's in the other room, or they both are, and all of a sudden they hear a scream. So they rush into the room and they find Katie crying hysterically, saying that Lauren took my toy away from me and hit me over the head with it. Well, probably the parents are going to proceed to punish Lauren for taking the toy away from Katie and hitting her over the head with it. They take the toy away, they give it back to Katie, they put Lauren in the chair and say, sit there for 15 minutes and think about what you've done. Now think about that simple example in terms of the 3 functions of punishment, right? They reestablished justice, got the toy back to Katie, who was originally playing with it. They attempted to correct the offender by having her sit in the chair for 15 minutes while she thought about what she did. And remember Alex, the 3rd child who was there. He's just sitting and watching everything and hopefully thinking that, well, I don't want this to happen to me, so I'll find another way to get a toy that somebody else has. So the idea there is that's the 3rd function of punishment, to deter others. Now, that's a simple example. Not all infractions are the same. Not all infractions involve a breaking of a law. Some infractions can't be undone. So while the toy could be given back to Katie, in a case, let's say, like cheating or speeding, you can't uncheat or you can't unspeed. In a sense, you really can't unsteal, and so what we usually, if the article stolen can't really be returned, we have people make restitution, pay back the amount of money that something was worth. In the case of lying, you can't really unlie. You can't usually undo the damage that your lying might have caused to someone else. Yes, just like in the classroom, I have to have some water. So those are the 3 functions of punishment. Now, obviously, in order for there to be punishment, there has to be something wrong done. Just the parents couldn't just walk into the room and look at the kids and say, well, you're playing together pretty well, but I think you need to be punished. That wouldn't work at all. That would be completely illogical. Right? So for there to be punishment, there has to be wrongdoing, and the person has to be worthy of punishment. Guilt has to be present. The person actually has to be guilty of whatever it is they're being accused of having done. Furthermore, someone who punishes has to have the authority to punish. So a stranger couldn't walk in to the yard, let's say, sees the 3 children playing, say, take the scene outside, sees what happens, and take it upon himself as a stranger to correct and try to rectify the situation. That really wouldn't be appropriate from an ethical point of view. And you'll see thirdly there in C3, punishment should be administered for the common good. Punishment is supposed to improve the situation. It's not supposed to cause the situation to deteriorate. Punishment should be proportionate to the infraction, to the crime or the violation, whatever it is. So, for example, while you can get a pretty steep fine for speeding, say maybe around $100 or something, it wouldn't really fit the crime to give you $1,000 or a $5,000 fine for speeding. And you can imagine examples in other sorts of situations where the punishment would be out of proportion to the infraction. So, for example, if the mom or dad would have gone into the room where the kids were playing, saw what happened after they gave the toy back to Katie, said to Lauren, okay, now you're going to stay in your room for 24 hours straight. Probably, most likely, we would say that would be a disproportionate punishment. Furthermore, punishment can always be decreased, but it can't really be increased. So mom or dad could come back in the room after 5 or 10 minutes and say to Lauren, okay, you can get out now, you can get out a little bit early. But what it really wouldn't be ethically proper to do is come in and say, we thought about it some more. You need to sit in that chair for 45 minutes instead of just 15 minutes. Lauren is rightly going to object. Hey, you just said 15 minutes. That's my punishment, and I'm willing to fulfill that. So finally, as you can see in E, we get to the major thing with regard to punishment, and that is corporal punishment, and in particular capital punishment. Now notice that, at least in the United States, this isn't true in other countries of the world, but at least in the United States, we only use corporal punishment for extremely serious crimes such as murder. You don't, for example, get beaten if you get caught speeding or stealing or cheating or whatever. There is a link to a news article. Oh, it's pretty old. It's about 30 years old, but it brings the point home very clearly. Look up this example, Mark Chicano, right, who cries out to be executed after he's been convicted of a triple murder. I won't go into the details because you can read the details in that link. Now the question is capital punishment just? Notice here that we have Immanuel Kant reappearing on the scene, and Kant's idea is that if life imprisonment is the alternative to the death penalty, then life imprisonment is either too mild or too severe. And you see why he says that here. If the criminal is not repentant of his crime, then life imprisonment is too mild. Then he does need to be, as Mark Chicano was crying out, to be killed. He needs to be killed. On the other hand, if the criminal is repentant and remorseful for his crime, then life imprisonment is too severe, because then he has to live with that remorse throughout his entire life. So in Kant's view, the death penalty, capital punishment, is just about right. It sort of hits the mean between the two extremes. Now there are some who adhere to an ethical theory, which you probably haven't heard of. It was popular, again, maybe 30, 35 years ago, called the seamless garment. And that's an attempt to connect any ethical issue which has to do with human life. And basically asks the question, could there possibly be any crime ever which would deserve the death penalty? Or would every taking of human life be an equal violation of the dignity of human life? Well, the seamless garment is really a garment with seams, right, that aren't recognized. Yes, there are differences in instances where one person causes the death of another. We've seen examples like that, but here we're specifically looking at the element of guilt. And could it be the case, the ethical question is, could it be the case that if you have violated another person's life, that you are in fact deserving of death? Right? And you see some other questions that relate to that there in E 2, 3, 4, and 5. The big question is, does the person, as it says in number 4, E4, does the person who commits murder deserve death? Do they merit death as a proportionate punishment in accord with the natural law or classical realism? Now that raises another question. Ethically or philosophically speaking, could it be the case that capital punishment is permissible but not required? Or as it says in number 5, licit but not mandatory? It is important to distinguish between issues that have to do with innocent life and issues that have to do with life where a crime has been committed and where there is guilt. So we think of innocent life, you're going to think about issues like abortion, infanticide, and euthanasia. When you think about self-defense, when you think about war, when you think about punishment, it's not exactly the same, because the person who's attacking you is not innocent, the enemy in war is not innocent, and the person who has taken another person's life is not innocent. So the taking of lives in those cases, the causing of death in those cases, is a different kind of consideration than the taking of life in abortion, infanticide, and euthanasia. And that's really the reason why the argument, which was referred to for many years as the seamless garment, just doesn't seem to work. Does life in imprisonment equally protect society? And you get some questions there which arise with regard to the issue of life imprisonment, which are very well worth considering. The issue of your fellow prisoners, if you're in prison for murder, the prison guards, the possibility of escape, and usually, in most cases, the possibility of parole. It's hard to answer the question whether or not capital punishment restores the common good. And there are, again, a number of questions here that relate to that. And if we were in the classroom, we could discuss these a little bit better, and you could insert your own feedback, which I'm always very eager to hear. Whether or not capital punishment fits the common good is almost something that has to be looked at in terms of each individual case, and it has to be looked at in terms of how the penalty of death is actually administered, so that we could get, as it says in 8F, back to number 5 above. There are practical objections to the death penalty. Many point out, and it's true, it seems, at any rate, that it's not fairly applied. Many point out that because of a long period of time between conviction and actual execution, that there's no real element of deterrence. Many point out that mistakes could be made. However, this raises an interesting question, which you see there in number 9D. And that is the question that if some innocent persons are going to die by capital punishment, will some innocent persons also die by virtue of murderers who are not given the death penalty? It's something to be considered. Furthermore, if, as some people say, probably not legitimately, but as some people say, the capital punishment is state murder, well, does that make life imprisonment state kidnapping? Well, which is more barbaric in actuality, capital punishment or life imprisonment? I've toured jails, as perhaps you have. Hopefully none of you have been in jail. I actually haven't been in jail or in prison except as an onlooker. But pictures we see, the reality that we know of a prison or even the county jail here in Louisville, Kentucky, is not a pleasant experience. It's not any place that you want to end up. It can be actually referred to as a barbaric experience. So which is worse? How does capital punishment ultimately relate to human dignity? Could it be the case, and many have argued this, many who adhere very strongly to the classical realist natural law view, could it be the case that to administer the death penalty is good, but to withhold it, knowing it's ethical to administer it, is better? Well, that's a somewhat difficult question to answer, right? Could it be the case that mercy can only be shown if the ethicality of the punishment is acknowledged? And the last question, if we abolish the death penalty, is that progress or is that regression? What really is the case there? Which really is the better way to meet the crime with the proper punishment? I hope you all are well.